This video is part of a series of lectures on the topic of measurement, which includes the measurement of information in comprehensive information theory, or CIT. A bit of background will be helpful, so let me provide that for you. Several years ago, I exchanged a few emails with an information scientist. During that exchange, I asked him what information issues were on his list of unsolved problems. He replied that one unsolved problem was how to measure information for what he called non-cartoon cases. He listed Mount Rushmore as an example of a non-cartoon case. In other words, he was saying that he had no way to quantify the information in a material entity, such as Mount Rushmore. I replied to him that CIT had a method for obtaining a measure of information for any material entity, which would include Mount Rushmore, a house, a car, a simple cupcake, an elaborate cake, or any other material entity. I also conveyed to him that CIT's method was based on a generalized notion of reproduction, and was universally applicable. Without requesting any explanation of what that meant, the idea was rejected, and our exchange ended. Here you will get to critique and evaluate the merits, or lack thereof, of CIT's method. Other videos introduce, explain, and illustrate CIT's general notion of reproduction as a method for obtaining a measure of information. This particular video contains an application of that method, specifically aimed at answering the question, how much information is in Mount Rushmore? Terms and concepts that have been introduced in other videos will be used freely, with perhaps a brief note, or reference. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to submit them. Alright, let's get started. As a reminder, CIT's method of using a generalized notion of reproduction to measure information stems from Claude Shannon's work. On the second paragraph in the introduction of his seminal 1948 paper, Claude Shannon wrote, "The fundamental problem of communication is that of reproducing at one point, either exactly or approximately, a message selected at another point." The key idea in that sentence is the word, reproducing. At that time Shannon was working for Bell Laboratories, whose primary interest was getting a message from point A to point B as accurately as possible. The bottom line is this: measuring the information in a message is directly related to reproducing that message, under a specific set of conditions. What was done in CIT was to generalize that idea, such that it applies to any material entity, not just to messages. That generalization was possible because messages are themselves material entities, that is, messages are a subset of the entire set of material entities. Putting all of this together is what leads to CIT's method for measuring information in a material entity. Specifically, CIT substitutes the question, how much information is in a given material entity, with the question, how much information is needed to reproduce the given material entity. Thus, for our exercise we substitute the question, how much information is in Mount Rushmore, with the question, how much information is needed to reproduce Mount Rushmore. Okay, let's continue. As a quick reminder, CIT expresses that reproducing a material entity requires a recipe, which has two components. The two components of a recipe for any material entity are the mass energy and the program. Recall that all material entities are mass energy configurations, or MECs. This means that any material entity is simply mass energy that is configured in a certain way. So for example, to reproduce the wooden table that's displayed on the screen, we fundamentally need just two things: the mass energy, commonly called the material, and the complete manufacturing instructions for the table, which we call the program. Those two things together make up the recipe for the table. When this recipe is actualized, the result is the finished table. We now have to discuss a little bit about manufacturing. Don't worry, later this will all come together and make sense. The overall subject of manufacturing is vast, in scope and depth. Fortunately, for our purposes we only need to cover the topic at a high level. We don't need the myriad of details. There are two things to keep in mind in this discussion. First, we are dealing exclusively with material entities. Second, the terms manufacturing, generating, and making are equivalent to the term reproducing. In other words, to manufacture is to generate, is to make, is to reproduce. Alright, let's proceed. In the most general sense, manufacturing any material entity involves some combination of three methods. Those three methods are subtractive, additive, and formative. As their names imply, subtractive methods subtract, that is, they remove or take away material. Additive methods are those that add material to obtain the desired object. Formative methods neither subtract nor add material, they merely give form or shape to the existing material. Manufacturing any material entity involves one, two, or all three of those methods. As a quick example, consider making a piece of pottery. Initially there is no material, no clay, and so material must be added. The clay is put on the turntable, and then subtractive and formative processes are executed. The end result, which used all three methods of manufacturing, is a finished piece of pottery. The advent of computers allowed the creation of an important subtractive manufacturing technology, known as computer numerical controlled machining, CNC machining for short. CNC machining is strictly a subtractive method of manufacturing, that is, we begin with a chunk of material, and then remove material until obtaining the desired object. In theory, it's very straightforward, involving three basic steps. In step 1, an engineer creates a computerized design of the object to be manufactured. In step 2, a machinist transforms the computerized design into a CNC program, called a G-code program. In step 3, the machinist sets up the CNC machine with the G-code, and with all the tools that will be used during the manufacturing process. That's essentially it. Now simply provide the material, and execute the CNC program. Let's provide a quick, real-life example of this. Alright, step 1 is to design the object on a computer. Step 2 converts the computer design into a program, called G-code, for the CNC machine. In step 3, the G-code is programmed into the CNC machine, the tooling and material are provided, and then it's off to the races. In this real-life example, the goal is to manufacture the head of an American bald eagle, entirely out of solid aluminum. The following series of pictures highlight the entire process, from beginning to end. First, the desired object is designed on a computer. That computer design is converted into a G-code program. The CNC machine is programmed with the G-code, and equipped with all tooling. The material is provided. In this case the material is a solid block of aluminum, shown here. CNC machining is a subtractive manufacturing method. Therefore, when the program is executed, the CNC machine removes material from the original block of material. The precise amount and location of material that's removed will be dictated by the commands in the G-code program. The entire process is accomplished in a series of stages, or passes. Following are 6 snapshots of different stages of the process for this project. Snapshot number 1 shows the material positioned in the CNC machine. Snapshot number 2 shows the start of the process of removing material. Snapshot number 3 shows more material being removed. Snapshot number 4 continues material removal. Note that the desired object is starting to become recognizable. Snapshot number 5 shows the process near the completion stage. Finally, snapshot number 6 shows the final result, that is, the CNC machine has completed manufacturing the desired object. Now, what does any of this have to do with measuring the information in Mount Rushmore? I'm glad you asked. Let's proceed to answer that question. We had asked, what does any of this have to do with measuring the information in Mount Rushmore? Let's begin with just a general overview, and then we'll provide the details. Imagine a CNC machine so immensely large that it's able to work on an entire mountain. Let's now supply a mountain of granite, as shown here, to that CNC machine. Next, let's program that CNC machine with the necessary G-code to manufacture the Mount Rushmore faces. Just as in the example with the head of the bald eagle, when this CNC machine has finished executing the program, we'll have the desired material object. Alright, let's get into the details to show how all of this answers the original question. Keep in mind that this is an application of CIT's method for measuring the information in any material entity, not only for Mount Rushmore. Creating Mount Rushmore was entirely a subtractive method, just as all CNC machining. Here is Mount Rushmore in its original state. This mountain is the material that will be used in the manufacturing process. Humans then provided and executed the program that created Mount Rushmore. The process was a subtractive method, in which explosives, hammers, and chisels were used to remove material in the right locations and amounts. The final product of this manufacturing process is the memorial monument known today. Recall that to reproduce any material entity in CIT, a recipe with two components is required. Those two components are physical material and a program. Regardless of how the material is obtained, an amount of information is associated with that material. In other words, the material component of the recipe contains an amount of information, which we will call M. The program component of the recipe also contains an amount of information, which we will call P. Both M and P depend on a number of factors, all of which are contained in the measurement reference for the measurement. As mentioned at the start of this video, here we're using the terms and concepts freely, since other CIT presentations provide the full details. Okay, so for the eagle head we have, M eagle plus P eagle equals the total information in the eagle head. Stated differently, the information in the bald eagle head, which is a material entity, is the information that is needed to reproduce, or create, the eagle head, and that amount is M eagle plus P eagle. In similar fashion, for Mount Rushmore we have that M Rushmore plus P Rushmore equals the total information in Mount Rushmore. Stated differently, a measurement of the information in Mount Rushmore, which is a material entity, is the information that's needed to reproduce Mount Rushmore, and that amount is M Rushmore plus P Rushmore. You may already get it, but just in case not, let's quickly review this. For the bald eagle head, we placed a block of aluminum in the CNC machine, and programmed the CNC machine with the G-code. The G-code program executed, and the desired result was obtained. An amount of information, M plus P, is associated with producing that material entity, and that's the information in the solid aluminum bald eagle head. Now do exactly the same for Mount Rushmore. Place the block of material in the CNC machine, and program it with the required G-code. When the G-code program executes, the desired result will be obtained. An amount of information, M plus P, is associated with producing that material entity. That is the information in Mount Rushmore. To emphasize, precisely the same method may be used for any material entity, not only for the aluminum eagle head, or for Mount Rushmore. In the next slide, we'll answer a few questions related to what's been presented. Alright, let's ask 3 questions, and answer them as concisely as possible. Other CIT presentations provide background and additional details for these abbreviated answers. To provide the setting, recall that CIT's approach to measure information in a material entity is to determine the information required to reproduce, or create, the material entity. That determination stems from a recipe with 2 components. One is a material, called M, and the other is a program, called P. The first question is, Why isn't m by itself enough to reproduce a material entity? The abbreviated answer is that m is only matter, or mass energy, whereas a material entity is a mass energy configuration, MEC for short. That point is emphasized in CIT, which is what leads to CIT's position that all material entities are information. Here's a quick example to illustrate this. Suppose that we wish to reproduce a specific material entity, namely, one molecule of glucose. All of the material is provided. That material is 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. Since all of the material has been provided, do we have the desired material entity, one glucose molecule? No, we do not. Configure those same atoms in different arrangements, as displayed, and we get different material entities, namely, glucose, fructose, or galactose. It was the arrangement, or configuration, of the atoms that made all the difference. The configuration of matter is specified by the program component, or P, of the recipe. That's why only the M part of a recipe is not enough to reproduce a material entity. The second question is, M is mass energy, and since CIT has stated that mass energy alone is not information, how is it that there is information in M? The answer to that question relates to the source of the material, and involves the concepts of measurement reference, which includes the level of a measurement. Succinctly, the material had to come from some source. That source usually establishes the level for the information measurement of that material. For example, recall the solid aluminum block that was used to make the eagle head. That material, M, may have been obtained simply by providing the number 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0 to the metal store. That number is the binary code name for a solid block of aluminum having the desired dimensions. That number has 7 bits and, therefore, the material, M, contains 7 bits of information at the level of the metal store. In other words, 7-bit code reproduces the aluminum block at that store. At a different level it would be a different information amount. For instance, at the level of the company that mines the ore, from which the aluminum is extracted, the aluminum block may contain millions of bits of information. In any event, there is a specific amount of information that's attached to the material component of a recipe. That amount is what's required to obtain, or reproduce, the material, at the specified level. Let's proceed to the next question. This video contained an application of CIT's method for measuring the information in a material entity, such as in Mount Rushmore. The essence of that method is to measure the information that is required to reproduce, or create, the subject material entity. The third and final question relates to the merit or value of CIT's method. The question is, isn't CIT's method for measuring information in a material entity somewhat arbitrary and subjective, which means that it does not yield a strong, objective measurement, but rather a number of weak and likely unsound measurements? In a word, the answer to that question is, no. Let's concisely explain that answer. Other CIT presentations showed how all measurements must be based on a measurement reference. In other words, it is impossible to obtain any measurement without some measurement reference. Furthermore, selecting a measurement reference is always a free choice, one that is usually determined by factors such as physical or analytical constraints, or by forward-looking towards function or purpose. The upshot is that every method, not only CIT's, must measure information using a freely chosen measurement reference. However, that fact does not necessarily render the obtained measurement as arbitrary, or subjective. That point was illustrated during an exercise in another CIT video. The goal of that exercise was to answer the question, how much information is in the word yes? That question was answered using a classical method, represented by the equation shown here. A summary of the results of that exercise is now displayed on the screen. Note that the information content in the word yes was approximately 4.75 bits, 14.1 bits, 21 bits, and 60 bits, respectively for each case. The only factor that was changed in each of the 4 cases was the reference reproduction set, or RRS, of the measurement reference. All else remained the same. Thus, merely by changing the RRS, 4 vastly different information measurements were obtained, all of them entirely valid within the specified measurement reference. The critical takeaway is that CIT's method, like any other measurement method, will always depend on the selected measurement reference. But again, a freely chosen measurement reference does not, by itself, invalidate an obtained measurement. Does this imply that CIT's method for measuring information in a material entity is perfect, or unassailable? Not necessarily. I welcome your critiques, questions, and challenges regarding CIT's method for measuring the information in material entities. Before ending, let's provide one answer to the question: how much information is in Mount Rushmore? Keep in mind that there are countless correct answers to that question, all depending on the chosen measurement reference. As we've already shown, to reproduce, or create Mount Rushmore, we need a recipe with 2 components. One possible material source could be specified by a set of coordinates that precisely identifies the mountain containing the material for manufacturing. In the case of Mount Rushmore, those coordinates were 43 degrees, 52 minutes, and 44 seconds north, and 103 degrees, 27 minutes, and 35 seconds west. Note that a set of coordinates for another mountain having the required material features would allow us to create another Mount Rushmore. Using this reference, M may contain 1000 bits of information. Next, the program with the instructions for creating Mount Rushmore can be documented, complete with drawings and fully detailed descriptions of what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and so on. That document is the complete program for making Mount Rushmore, and may contain 2 million bits of information. Therefore, under this measurement reference, the information in Mount Rushmore is 2,001,000 bits of information. That's the amount of information that is needed to reproduce Mount Rushmore. Again, this is just one of countless possible, correct answers. On that note, we'll end this presentation.